The champagne glass was still in my hand when I heard her say it. "This is Daniel, my temporary boyfriend." Her cousin laughed. Her aunt raised an eyebrow. I set the glass down on the nearest table so carefully that nobody even noticed my hand was shaking. "Temporary?" I asked. Melissa just smiled like she'd said something clever. I didn't argue. I didn't make a scene. I put my jacket on, walked past her family, and left her standing there in a room full of people who all knew something I didn't. What none of them knew was that by the time I got to my car, I had already decided what I was going to do next, and it had nothing to do with yelling. "My name is Daniel Reyes. I'm 29. I work as a freelance web developer in Denver, and I've spent most of my adult life being the guy who fixes things quietly instead of making noise. I met Melissa Hart 2.5 years ago at a mutual friend's barbecue. She was 27, funny, ambitious, working in marketing for a mid-size event company, and she had this way of making you feel like you were the only interesting person in the room. I fell for that fast, maybe too fast. We moved in together after 8 months, into a condo I had bought 2 years before we met. It wasn't a mansion, just a 2-bedroom near the light rail, but it was mine, paid for with money I'd saved during years of eating cheap and working late. Melissa paid a reduced rent because she said her old apartment lease was still draining her savings. I didn't mind. I figured it was temporary, and love meant carrying more weight when your partner needed it. The routine was simple. I worked from home most days, coding for clients, while she went into the office. We cooked dinner together on Sundays, watched bad reality shows, and talked about eventually buying a house somewhere with a yard. I trusted her because she never gave me an obvious reason not to. She remembered my mom's birthday. She sent me articles about my favorite hobbies. It felt like something real was being built, brick by brick, even if I was laying most of the bricks myself. There was one small ritual that made the whole thing feel real to me. Every Sunday morning, before either of us checked our phones, Melissa would make 2 cups of coffee and set mine down on my side of the counter without asking how I wanted it, because she already knew. It sounds like nothing, but it was the kind of small, unglamorous habit that convinces you a relationship has settled into something permanent. I never imagined that same counter would end up covered in printed bank statements 1.5 years later. I trusted her partly because of how she talked about her own family, complaining that her parents played favorites and that her cousin Jenna got praised for everything while she fought for the same recognition. I understood that pressure, so when she leaned on me for support, I saw it as helping her outrun something that shaped her long before I met her. That last part is where things started tilting long before the party. When Melissa's car needed a transmission replacement, I co-signed the loan because her credit was still recovering from student debt. When her Etsy shop selling hand-painted mugs started picking up, I built her entire website myself, registered the domain under my own hosting account, and spent nights debugging her checkout page for free. When she lost her apartment lease deposit in a dispute with her old landlord, I covered the difference so she wouldn't have to ask her parents. None of that felt like keeping score at the time. It felt like partnership. But quietly, without either of us saying it out loud, I had become the financial foundation of almost everything she was building. Her car ran because of my signature. Her business existed because of my server. Her rent was low because of my mortgage. I didn't think about leverage. I thought about love. That distinction would matter a lot more than I expected. I want to be clear, I wasn't tallying any of this at the time. I'm the kind of person who avoids confrontation until it's unavoidable, including financial confrontation. When friends asked if Melissa paid her fair share, I'd wave it off and say we were figuring it out together, even though I was the only one adjusting. What I didn't fully register was how much control that gave me without ever asking for it. The domain for her shop was registered to my name and my card, since it had been easier to set up that way during a busy month for her at work. The lease had never been amended to add her name. The car loan had my name attached for as long as it existed. I hadn't built any of that as a safety net, it had simply accumulated. The party that started everything was her cousin Jenna's engagement celebration, held at her aunt's house on a Saturday in early spring. Melissa's family had never fully warmed to me, not in any dramatic way, just a low hum of politeness that never became warmth. I told myself that took time. I told myself I was overthinking it, which has always been my weakness. I avoid confrontation until the evidence is too loud to ignore, and even then I second-guess myself first. Early in the evening, everything seemed normal. Then Trevor showed up. Trevor was Melissa's ex from college, the one she described as immature whenever his name came up, the one she swore she hadn't spoken to in years. He walked in like he owned the room, hugged half her family, and made his way straight to her. I watched Melissa's posture change the second she saw him. Her voice got lighter, her laugh got louder. When her aunt asked who I was, standing right beside her, Melissa hesitated for half a second too long before answering. "This is Daniel," she said, "my temporary boyfriend." She said it like a joke, glancing at Trevor while she said it, like the words were really meant for him. Her cousin Jenna laughed nervously. Her aunt gave a strange little smile and didn't correct her. Nobody said anything to defend me, not even Melissa's younger sister, who I'd always gotten along with. I stood there for a second, feeling the exact moment the room decided I wasn't the story that mattered. "Temporary?" I finally asked, keeping my voice level. Melissa waved a hand like I was being dramatic. "It's just a joke, babe. Don't make it weird." Trevor smirked into his drink. That was the anchor, the phrase I would carry with me for weeks. "Temporary boyfriend," said out loud, in front of her family, next to the man she used to love. I didn't argue in that kitchen. I told her I needed air, walked outside, and sat in my car for 11 minutes without turning the key. My hands weren't shaking from anger exactly. They were shaking because a version of the last 2.5 years was rearranging itself in my head, piece by piece, faster than I could process it. I drove home alone that night and left her to find her own way back. She texted me twice, calling me sensitive for reacting to a harmless comment. I didn't respond right away. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the exact tone of her voice when she said temporary, trying to decide if I was overreacting or if I had just been handed information I'd been too comfortable to notice sooner. The next morning, I couldn't eat breakfast. I sat at my kitchen counter with coffee going cold in front of me, scrolling back through months of our shared calendar, looking for a pattern I hadn't let myself see before. Small things started surfacing: a late-night work event she'd mentioned once, a change in her phone habits over the past 2 months, screen always face down now, notifications silenced. I called my older sister Vanessa, who has never been shy about telling me when I'm avoiding a hard truth. "You've been the guy who pays for everything and asks for nothing back," she said. "That's not romantic, Daniel. That's a role, and roles get replaced." I didn't like hearing it, but I couldn't argue with it either. I didn't sleep much that week. I'd lie awake replaying the exact second of hesitation before Melissa answered her aunt, that half-beat pause where I think she was deciding which version of the truth would play better in the room. I started sleeping on the far side of the bed, close to the edge, like some part of me had already begun moving out before I'd consciously decided anything. On Tuesday, I drove to the grocery store and sat in the parking lot for almost 20 minutes without going in, staring at a shopping list I'd written for a dinner we were supposed to cook together that weekend. I never went inside. I just drove home instead, still holding the list, unable to picture cooking a meal for someone who had called me a placeholder in front of her family. The hardest part wasn't the anger. It was the quiet, humiliating question that kept surfacing whenever I stopped distracting myself. Had I always been this convenient to her, or had something changed recently? I didn't have an answer yet, and not having one felt worse than knowing something painful for certain. 2 days later, the concrete piece I hadn't known I was looking for landed in my inbox by accident. Melissa's friend Priya, who worked with her, had meant to forward a group photo from the party to her book club but sent it to the wrong thread, one that still had my email attached from a shared document months ago. Along with the photo was a screenshot she'd forgotten to crop out, a text conversation between Melissa and Priya from 3 weeks earlier. In it, Melissa called me safe money, said Trevor was back in town and being weird about it, and wrote one line I couldn't unsee: "Daniel's great for now, but I'm not marrying a guy who codes websites for a living." There was a date stamp, 3 weeks before the party, before the joke that supposedly meant nothing. That was the evidence that changed everything, not because it proved she was cruel, but because it proved she'd been planning this feeling long before that party gave her an excuse to say it out loud. I sat with that screenshot for almost an hour before I did anything. Then I stopped feeling sorry for myself and started thinking clearly for the first time in days. I didn't confront her that day. Instead, I quietly logged into my own hosting account and reviewed exactly what was tied to my name. Her Etsy website was running on my domain, paid through my card, under my account from the beginning. Her car loan had my signature and my credit on the line. Her reduced rent existed because I had never formally updated our lease agreement to reflect a fair split. Every piece of leverage I had was already sitting there, untouched, waiting. On Thursday evening, before she got home from work, I made my first move. I sent her a calm, direct text. "I'm removing myself as the account holder for your shop's hosting and domain by Sunday. You'll need to set up your own account to keep it running." This isn't punishment, it's just not my responsibility to carry anymore. Then I added one more line. I'm not interested in being anyone's temporary anything. She called 4 times in 20 minutes. I let it ring. When she finally got home, she found me at the kitchen table with a folder of printed statements, the domain renewal notice, and the car loan paperwork laid out neatly in front of me. "What is this?" she asked, voice already climbing. "This is me deciding what I'm actually responsible for," I said, "and what I'm not anymore." The counterattack started almost immediately. She accused me of overreacting to one joke and said I was being controlling by pulling financial support out of nowhere. She called her mother, who called me directly the next morning, asking why I was punishing Melissa for a comment made at a party. Jenna texted me saying I was making things awkward for the whole family right before her wedding. Melissa tried a different approach 2 days later, showing up with takeout from my favorite restaurant, suddenly affectionate, telling me the joke obviously hadn't meant what it sounded like. When that didn't work, she pivoted again, posting a vague story online about people who can't take a joke without making everything a punishment, clearly aimed at me, clearly meant for our mutual friends to see. I'll admit there was a night I questioned whether I'd gone too far. Vanessa reminded me why I hadn't. "You're not punishing her for a joke," she said. "You're finally reacting to a pattern she's had the whole time." That same night Priya reached out directly, this time on purpose, and apologized for the accidental screenshot, but confirmed something worse. Melissa had told her weeks earlier that she was keeping her options open in case things with Trevor went somewhere. I stopped arguing after that and started building a timeline instead. I pulled 22 months of shared expenses, calculated exactly how much I'd covered beyond any fair split, roughly $11,000 between rent adjustments, the car loan cushion, and unpaid development work for her shop. I saved every relevant message, the party comment repeated by 3 separate witnesses, and Priya's screenshot, backed up before it could disappear. I brought all of it to my friend Marcus, who has known me since college and has never automatically taken my side in anything. He read through the documents twice before saying anything. "This isn't revenge," he said finally. "This is just you finally seeing the actual numbers." He asked hard questions too, whether I was certain the temporary boyfriend comment wasn't genuinely just a bad joke taken out of context. I told him about the screenshot from 3 weeks before the party. He nodded slowly. "Yeah, that's not context, that's a plan." Marcus pushed back on one thing though, and I respected him for it. He asked whether I was building this case to actually protect myself financially, or just to win an argument I was still angry about. It was a fair question. So before I did anything else, I called my bank to confirm exactly how the car loan was structured and whether removing myself as a cosigner was even possible without her defaulting. The representative told me I couldn't remove myself unilaterally, but I could stop making voluntary extra payments immediately and require her to refinance within 60 days, or risk the account going to collections under both our names. I also called the hosting provider for her shop's domain, just to confirm the renewal date. It turned out the annual payment was due in 11 days, on my card, automatically. That gave me an actual deadline instead of a vague plan, something concrete I could point to. I wasn't going to let it renew silently the way it had for 2 years running. Once I had the numbers and the dates confirmed, I stopped feeling like I was reacting to a comment at a party. I felt like I was closing out a business relationship that had quietly been operating at a loss for a long time, and for the first time since that Saturday night, I felt calm instead of wounded. The confrontation came the following weekend at a small family dinner Melissa's mother arranged, insisting we work things out like adults in front of relatives. Melissa spoke first, telling everyone I had cut her off financially over one insensitive comment, painting herself as blindsided and hurt. Gathering sympathetic nods from around the table, I let her finish completely before I said anything. "I want to make sure everyone has the full picture," I said, sliding the printed timeline across the table. "This isn't about one comment. It's about $11,000 I covered over the last 2 years, a website that's still running on my account, and a text conversation from 3 weeks before that party calling me safe money you weren't planning to marry." The room went quiet. Melissa's mother's face changed first, confusion sliding into something more careful. Jenna looked down at her plate and said nothing. Trevor, who had somehow been invited, suddenly found something urgent on his phone. Melissa tried to interrupt twice, saying the screenshot was taken out of context, but I kept my voice steady. "You told your family I was temporary," I said, "in front of the man you were still keeping around as an option. That's not a joke I misunderstood. That's exactly what you meant." Her mother asked quietly if it was true, the text message, the timeline. Melissa didn't answer right away, and in a room that size, silence answered for her. Melissa's father, who had stayed quiet through most of dinner, finally spoke up and asked why the domain and the loan were still in my name at all if things had been serious for 2 years. Melissa didn't have a clean answer, only that it was just easier that way, which sounded weaker out loud than it probably had in her head. Her sister, who I mentioned had always been friendly with me, asked to see the screenshot herself. I slid my phone across the table. She read it twice, then looked at Melissa with an expression that told me exactly whose side she'd landed on. Melissa tried one more redirect, saying I was humiliating her in front of her entire family the same way she'd supposedly humiliated me at the party, as if the two things were equivalent. I told her calmly that reading a factual timeline out loud wasn't the same as calling someone temporary in front of a room full of relatives while smiling at an ex. Her mother asked her directly, in front of everyone, whether the text about being safe money was real. Melissa didn't deny it. She just said she'd been venting to a friend and it wasn't meant to be taken literally, which felt like its own kind of confession. I gave her one final line, the one I'd been holding since that night in the kitchen. I was never your placeholder, I said. I was just the only one honest enough to leave when I found out that's what you thought I was. Nobody laughed this time. Her mother reached over and quietly took the folder to read it herself. That was the moment the confrontation actually ended, not with shouting, but with the truth finally outweighing the performance. The consequences unfolded over the following month in ordinary, unglamorous ways. I finished transferring the domain to her own account as promised, and stepped back from managing her checkout system entirely. The car loan stayed my responsibility only until she refinanced it under her own credit 3 weeks later, something she should have done a year earlier if she'd been serious about independence. We didn't get some dramatic reconciliation scene. Melissa moved out at the end of the month, back into an apartment with her sister, and the condo stayed exactly what it had always legally been, mine. Jenna's wedding happened without the tension carrying into it, mostly because Melissa avoided bringing me up again after that dinner. Trevor, as far as I know, didn't stick around long once the excitement of being an option wore off. Priya and I stayed in touch, mostly out of the strange bond people form after accidentally exposing the truth. She told me later that Melissa had been quietly frustrated for months that I wasn't going anywhere fast enough in my career, and that the comment at the party wasn't really about Trevor at all. It was about control, about testing what she could say publicly and still keep me compliant afterward. The hosting deadline came and went without incident. Melissa transferred the domain to a new account 2 days before the renewal date, sent me a short, business-like email confirming it was done, and that was the last direct message we exchanged about the shop. The bank confirmed her refinanced loan closed on schedule, and I received a letter a few weeks later showing my name had officially come off the account. It felt strangely anticlimactic, closing something that had quietly shaped 2 years of my life with nothing more dramatic than a form letter. Her mother called me once more, weeks after the dinner, not to argue but to apologize for not asking more questions sooner. She admitted she'd noticed the imbalance too, in small ways, but hadn't wanted to interfere. I appreciated the honesty, even if it came later than it should have. Jenna's wedding happened that autumn, and I wasn't invited, which I understood and didn't fight. I still think about that night sometimes, not with anger anymore, just clarity. I misunderstood patience for partnership for a long time. My weakness was believing that quietly covering more and more of the weight in a relationship would eventually be matched, instead of noticed and expected. The boundary I set wasn't about punishing her for one joke. It was about finally refusing to keep being generous with someone who had already decided, weeks earlier, that generosity was all I was good for. I don't regret walking out of that party without her. I regret not walking out of the pattern a lot sooner. Some relationships don't end with one dramatic betrayal. They end with a comment that finally makes an old truth impossible to ignore anymore. So tell me honestly, was I wrong for pulling my financial support the moment I found out she'd called me safe money weeks before that party, or should I have given her one more chance to explain herself first? Drop your judgment in the comments, and if you want more real stories like this one, subscribe for what's coming next.